Hi everybody, and welcome back to video 3 of our Mora-based approach to Greek accentuation. In this video we are going to talk about rule 2, which reads that if the designated mora is unavailable because it doesn't exist or is to the left of the limit vowel, the tone goes on to the next lower numbered mora. And the only thing we really need to talk about here is that limit vowel business, because the rest of it is common sense. And I actually showed you an example of this already back when talking about the difference between an acute and a circumflex accent in the very first video. Now that you know rule 1, you might notice that the second form, chorai, is one that should carry its tone on mora 4, and that's because it meets the criterion in rule 1 for that tone, and that is that morai 3 and 2 are in the same vowel with each other. So we should have the high tone on 4, and that should be marked with an acute accent to show you that. But we don't have mora 4, so what do we do? Again, it's common sense. We just put it on the next mora that is available, which is mora 3, and that means we need to put an accent mark on that shows that mora 3 tone. It's the leftward mora of a bimoraic omega, so it's going to be a circumflex. And you may recall that there weren't a whole lot of circumflexes. In fact, I think there were none in the last video. And that is because when rule 1 is operating straightforwardly, you don't have circumflexes. But if the tone ends up by rule 2 on a bimoraic vowel, that is going to be shown with a circumflex. And you can see that here. Here's an example of a word which in some forms is too short to have mora 4, when in those forms, that's where tone is supposed to be. And you will notice the 4 forms in the corners of this noun all have circumflexes. They all have 3 and 2 together. They all should put tone on mora 4, but mora 4 doesn't exist. The other forms, the ones in the middle, they just follow rule 1. And so nothing weird about them. And that's generally the case in some words in Greek as they go through their changes. They'll be affected by this, and in other forms they won't be affected by this. Here's an example of a word, for instance, which in some of its forms is not able to follow rule 1's default position of high tone on mora 3, although it is in many of them. But in 3 of them, even though tone is supposed to go on mora 3, it can't, so it ends up on mora 2. Again, really common sense. You don't see a circumflex here because remember that only goes on bimoraic vowels. And here, this omicron with the accent with the tone is unimoraic. So you're not going to see that visible symbol of kind of interfered with recession. Now, this is where it gets a little bit trickier, and that is that there are many nouns, adjectives, and pronouns in Greek that pretend to be too short for rule 1, even though they actually have the mora that is designated by rule 1, it doesn't carry the tone. So for example, in the plural of the noun eiranai, when you get to that, eiranai is accented like chorai with a mora 3 tone instead of having tone on mora 4. But the difference with eiranai is that it actually has mora 4. So what's going on here? And this is the effect of what I call the limit vowel. And what a limit vowel does is make any mora to its left unavailable to carry the high tone. Now, how do you know when a noun has a limit vowel? Well, you're always going to know it from its vocabulary entry. And you can always find it by looking at the first form in the vocabulary entry. Whatever vowel is carrying the accent, whatever vowel has a mora inside of it that is carrying the tone, that is the limit vowel. And so if you look at erana, when you learn that, erana, eranas he is going to be the vocabulary entry. And you can see from the first form, the nominative singular, that eta right there is the limit vowel. And you're not going to actually notice that in any form of this word until you get to that plural nominative eranai. And then you can see the effect, and you can also see the visible sign of it from the circumflex on it. Athenaios, the Athenian, you can see here that the I diphthong is the limit vowel. And in this case, you can also see it because it's got a circumflex on it, which shows you that tone is supposed to be on mora 4 right in that form, but cannot get there. that means that there are no mori to the left of that I diphthong that can ever carry high tone. We're also going to get words that have a limit vowel in their final vowel. The last vowel is the limit vowel. Something like potamos, and you can see it right there again in the nominative singular. Potamos means that nothing to its left is going to be available to carry high tone. And what this means in effect is that these words are, for purposes of accentuation, shorter than they really are. Eirana is really just rana for purposes of accentuation. Athenaios is really just naios for purposes of accentuation. And potamos is just mos for purposes of accentuation. So some words just don't have a limit vowel. So most simple finite verb forms that show person and number, are not going to have it, for instance, but some nouns and adjectives don't have it either. How do you know? Well, in those words, you're going to see that when you learn them, the first form is going to have its accent on its first syllable, or at least its third syllable from the end. And that's what you have here. The third syllable from the end, anthropos, has the accent, which shows you that there's no effect of a limit vowel in any of the forms of these words. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you need to pause the video to look at this, you're familiar with this word and its sort of accentual pattern. But the presence of the accent on the third vowel from the end is what tells you there's no limit vowel having an effect in this word. But when we come to a word where we do have it, so it's going to, the accent in that first form is going to be on the last or the next to last vowel. Like in athenaios, remember that athenaios is just naios for purposes of accentuation. So Mora-4 is not available in 3 of the forms in this paradigm when it is supposed to get the accent. And you can see again the circumflex showing this because I happens to be a biMoraic vowel. You will not see a circumflex or the effect, but you can still tell it's going on in a word like parthenos. So here the limit vowel is that unimoraic epsilon, and you will notice that the form never recedes to the left of it. You never have recession to a mora to the left of that epsilon in any form. And in some forms that's irrelevant. But in other forms like parthenos itself, the nominative, you will see that mora 3 tone, which is our default, doesn't happen. And over on the top of the right-hand column, parthenoi, again, Rule 1 tells us Mora 3 is supposed to be the default, but it can't happen because that is to the left of the limit vowel, and therefore it is unavailable for accentuation. So we have 2 rules now. These 2 rules govern recessive accentuation. Rule 1 is the basic operation of recessive accentuation, and Rule 2 tells us circumstances in which it might be limited, either by the length of the word or by the presence of one of these limit vowels. Together, then, this is recessive accentuation, and this covers the vast majority of words in Greek.